Good afternoon. My name is Richard Marx, and I'd like to welcome you to the second in a series of noon lectures sponsored by the Associated Student Speakers Program. Today we are fortunate to have with us a candidate of the Peace and Freedom Party for the U.S. Senate. He's basically a writer, but he's been a social critic and agitator for basically his whole career. He's written books such as Prelude to Riot, State of the Unions. He's written articles for the Atlantic Monthly, LA Free Press, California Law Review. He has said on the subject of life in general that although I want to be loved as much as anyone else, I never believed life was meant to be just a popularity contest, and so I've made my share of mistakes, including some bad ones. But the only people who don't make errors are those who do and say nothing. I find that position an intolerable one. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce our guest for today, the Peace and Freedom Party's candidate for the U.S. Senate, Mr. Paul Jacobs.
There seems to be some question about whether I'm going to get elected or not. According to the polls, the Peace and Freedom Party is only registering 2% of the vote. Unlike George Wallace, I don't think the polls are fixed. I think, as a matter of fact, 2% of the vote sounds a little high to me. And I finally realized why I am not getting elected. It's not, as the Rafferty people say, because I'm a commie. There are a couple of complicated reasons. One reason I'm not getting elected is because I don't like ethnic foods. Now, it turns out that in American politics, when you are campaigning for office, there are certain rules that you have to observe, and they're fixed set rules. And one of the rules is that when you go to a meeting, if you are speaking to a Mexican group, you have to begin the meeting by saying, "Como está usted?" And then everybody shouts, "Viva!" And you eat a tortilla while you're doing this. In addition, when you walk through Chinatown, you eat fortune cookies, and you say to the people on the streets of Chinatown, "Egg foo young, egg foo young." Do not say Ho Chi Minh. If you are addressing a Jewish audience, it is essential that you start out by saying Shalom and eat a blintz while you're talking. If you stand before a black audience, you have to say that you start out as Hubert Humphrey does by saying, "I'm a soul brother," and tell everybody how much you love chitlins. Well, the reason I'm not getting elected is that chitlins taste to me like someone ate them once. And tortillas lay in my belly like a lump, like a knish that hasn't been properly cooked. Blintzes give me gas, and I hate egg foo young. And the result of this is that it's absolutely impossible for me to boost my vote up much higher than the 2%. I want to tell you, however, that you ought not to be discouraged. I have had, or it looks as if I'm going to get, at least the endorsement of one group. I may get the endorsement of the homosexuals in San Francisco, because they seem to understand our campaign slogan better than anybody else. Our campaign slogan is "Get out from under," and that seems to strike a proper note. However, I lost the campaign endorsement of a group called the National Organization of Women, because when I got to that meeting, and I happened to be the fifth or the sixth candidate who was speaking, and as I listened to them speak, each of the candidates got up, and he said, they all happened to be men, and he said, "I'm married 15 years or 16 years, and I have a wife, and I have 3 daughters, and therefore I understand the problems of women." And when my turn came, I got up and said to this organization, who are good people, they're there for the things I'm for, like abortion, and equal opportunity for everybody, including the oppressed majority. And so I got up and said that I was automatically, evidently, entitled to their endorsement, since I had been married the longest of any of the candidates. As it happens, I've been married 30 years. And I said to the group, I hoped that they would give me their endorsement because of that and not be concerned about the fact that I had been married for 30 years to a man. Well, I blew it. I did not get their endorsement, as it turned out. Now, the fact of the matter is that this is about the level at which American politics seems to be operating in the year of 1968. And we see this, thank you, and we see this very clearly evidenced in the kind of senatorial race that's being run here in California. On the one hand, you have somebody like Rafferty, who is, as you can plainly see from the character of his seedy-looking supporters, a loudmouth, vulgar, demagogic boob who shouts and screams about motherhood and about how Eldridge Cleaver should not be allowed to speak at the university because he's an ex-convict and because he uses obscene language. And on the other hand, the Democrats present us with a kind of mealy-mouthed, mushy, weak echo chamber of what Rafferty says. When Rafferty screams that Cleaver shall not be allowed to speak at the university, Cranston sort of mumbles. Well, if I had been on the faculty of the university, I wouldn't have invited him either. And if I were a member of the Board of Regents, I don't know how I would vote on that question. On the issue of law and order, at which Max shouts over and over again, we have to repress crime, we've got to have the police as the thin blue line between ourselves and the rioters. Cranston comes in with a kind of tiny echo of that. He says, I am also for law and order. When Rafferty accuses Cranston of being soft on communism, because he says that, Rafferty says that Cranston once was in favor of recognition of communist China in the UN, Cranston responds by bravely saying, no, I never was for recognition of communist China. I'm against the recognition of communist China. On the question of the war in Vietnam, it's hard to say exactly what Rafferty's position is. He's never really enunciated it very clearly. But we do know what Cranston's position is on the war in Vietnam. Cranston thinks now, although he didn't think so when he managed to stop the CDC from passing a resolution condemning the war in Vietnam, Cranston now says that if he is elected, he will be in favor of stopping the bombing in North Vietnam because he wants to wait for some reciprocal action on the part of the North Vietnamese. He's not clear what that ought to be. My own feeling is that that's probably a pretty good idea, and I am proposing to the North Vietnamese that they can reciprocate very easily by pledging to the United States government that if the U.S. stops the bombing of North Vietnam will stop bombing Washington, D.C. And that's a fair kind of analysis that can be made. And so on every question between Cranston and Rafferty, as between the Republicans and the Democrats, we find essentially the same position, only said in different kind of styles. Rafferty says it in this loud, kind of sharp, irritating, raspy voice, and Cranston says it in a kind of better, more modulated liberal voice. The liberal has a certain special voice. It's a voice which never gets agitated. It never raises its level. It keeps calm at all times. And the difference is that when Rafferty says to the police, get in there and kill, his voice rises. But when Pat Brown said to the police at Berkeley, "Get in there and arrest," he said it in a calm voice, because he doesn't get excited. Liberals don't get excited. The city burns down, the whole society burns down, and liberals keep on saying, "Yes, but. Yes, but." Now, in this situation, the Peace and Freedom Party has a very difficult time. We have a difficult time at the senatorial level because, as you can see, lots of people in California are absolutely spooked out, freaked out at the notion that Max Rafferty is going to go to the Senate. And therefore they say, yes, we know Cranston's no good. We know what he did to Cy Cassidy in the CDC. We know his history. We know about the inheritance tax appraisers. But he is the lesser of two evils. And they say we have to vote for the lesser of two evils, because otherwise it will be just, a terrible scene. It's as if they had no memory. As if back in 1964, we weren't faced with a situation in which people said, well, yes, it's true, Johnson's no great shakes, but if Goldwater gets elected, the war in Vietnam will be escalated. So everybody voted for Johnson, and the war in Vietnam got escalated. And this is a typical pattern in American life, because what we have seen in American life is a gradual moving of what Arthur Schlesinger called the vital center, hardly very vital these days, to the right. Ever since 1948, this vital center has been moving further and further to the right. And now the liberals are in a position where they're going to have to support Hubert Humphrey, who I heard yesterday say that the United States would have to use force to put down these so-called wars of national liberation. Now, the fact is that the notion of putting down so-called wars of national liberation did not come from the reactionaries. It came out of the liberals. It was developed under Jack Kennedy, under whose administration there was the notion of counterinsurgency and the notion of fighting against these kinds of wars. So what we confront here then is about the most dismal period in American politics that is possible for us to conceive of. We're faced with a choice between a bunch of Neanderthal troglodytes. I don't know if I said that right, but you know what I mean. Cavemen who represent the Republican Party, and a group of people in the Democratic Party who bear no relationship whatsoever to the problems of the society in which we live. And that's the choice. That's the choice that you see before you. Wait till Rafferty sees his new supporters. That's enough to give him a clung, a sudden rush of crap to the heart. Now the fact is, it isn't necessary for us to have to live like this. There's nothing in the books that says we have to exercise just these two options. And we are beginning to see that other options are developing. One of the other options that's developing doesn't have to be a very happy one. George Wallace. George Wallace has learned something that neither the Republicans nor the Democrats have learned. George Wallace has learned how to talk to people who really have problems. Working people really have problems. They're worried. They're worried about their jobs. They're worried about the people who are going to live next door. And they understand when Wallace talks about law and order, they know what he means. He means he's going to keep them niggers out. Them niggers aren't going to move into their neighborhood. They dig that. That's the code that they understand. He started that. Wallace started that code. And what is extraordinary but not unexpected, is how quickly Humphrey and Nixon and Cranston and Rafferty picked up the code. They too talk about law and order. Occasionally they throw in something to satisfy the liberals. They throw the word justice in. That's supposed to keep you quiet, because now you'll know, well, it isn't going to be really tough. When we hit you on the head, it isn't going to be the toughest kind of hit on the head. It's just going to be a mild crack across the head. Now, the Peace and Freedom Party is trying to offer a different kind of alternative on the other side. We start out on the thesis that the two-party system has come to an end in America, and it should, evidently, since the two-party system has proved itself incapable of solving the problems of the society. You must bear in mind that when the Watts Revolt took place, Reagan was not the governor. Brown was the governor. In Detroit, it was a liberal Democrat who was the mayor, one of the best, when Detroit exploded. In New York City, it's a liberal Republican, practically indistinguishable from a liberal Democrat, who is the mayor now, when that city is being ripped apart. And the reason for that is not because these guys are good guys or bad guys. I mean, who cares whether Max Rafferty was a draft dodger or not? What difference does that make? You know, draft dodging these days isn't such a bad thing. Who cares? What's really important is that it doesn't matter who the mayor is. It doesn't matter who the governor is, as long as the mayor and the governor and the president are operating inside the framework of institutions which are incapable of solving the problems. And that's what the Peace and Freedom Party is all about. Now, if you ask me, what will happen when I get elected to the Senate? You look a little dubious? You don't think I'm going to get elected? No, I'll tell you what's going to happen now. See, in my fantasies, all candidates have fantasies. And my fantasy as I drive down the freeway runs something like this. The Republicans are so stupid that they nominated Rafferty. That means the liberal Republicans, if that's not a contradiction in terms, are going to vote for Cranston. And so Cranston will probably get elected because the Democrats will vote for him rather reluctantly. And then, you know, as I keep on driving and I'm thinking about this, I think to myself, well, 3 days before the election, the LA Times is going to print a story that Cranston got caught in a motel in Westwood with a 6-year-old boy. A girl, it'd be okay, but a boy is too much. So everybody has to vote for me. And there I am, walking down the aisle of the United States Senate on George Murphy's arm. He takes me up to the vice president, you know, he's got a bad voice now. He says, Mr. Vice President, I want you to meet the junior senator from California from the Peace and Freedom Party, Senator Jacobs. And I reach in my pocket and I pull out a joint, you know, and I give it to the Veep, and I say, okay, man, we'll turn the whole Senate on now, the whole Senate. Now, I want to tell you, when that happens and I am elected, first of all, I give you all jobs in the post office. Everybody gets another job in the post office. That's traditional for senators. Secondly, I'm not going to wait for 6 months to start talking for my maiden speech. I'm going to start talking right away. The instant I get inside the Senate chamber, because I'm not sure how long they're going to let me stay, considering what I will say, and that's what's important. What I will be saying when I am the senator is exactly the same kinds of things as I am saying here. That the institution of the Senate is incapable of solving the problems of the society. And not only is it incapable, but that the kind of atmosphere that exists in the Senate is an indication of the failure of these institutions. Let me give you just one illustration. Not the war in Vietnam, not the domestic crisis, another illustration. One that seemed to me to most clearly reveal what these institutions are all about. At the very moment that this movie actor playing this role out of a governor, you know, with the script in front of him all the time, was denouncing Cleaver and saying that Cleaver did not have the academic credentials to be a lecturer at the University of California, and Max Rafferty is coming out with this same garbage, at that very moment, the United States Senate was confirming unanimously, without a voice raised in dissent, the approval of the nomination of an Assistant Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare, who happened to be the president. He's the president of the university or the college from which Lyndon B. Johnson graduated before he started on his other career. This man he's got a PhD. And he got his PhD in the way I recommend to all of you who are graduate students working for a PhD. He got his PhD by taking his wife's master's dissertation, which wasn't very good anyway, and presenting it as his doctoral dissertation. It is clear, if you want to get a doctorate in the United States, marry a girl or a fella who writes master's dissertations. Now, that act, the confirmation of that man, was indeed obscene. That's what you mean by obscene. Obscene is not Eldridge Cleaver saying, "Fuck Reagan." That's not obscene. What's obscene is that man being confirmed for the Assistant Secretaryship of Health, Education, and Welfare. And we ought to understand the nature of obscenity, the true nature of obscenity. Obscenity is not language. Obscenity is action. Obscenity is napalm in Vietnam. That's obscene. Obscenity is the kind of positions that have been taken by this country in relationship to the rest of the world and the kind of positions that we have internally. Obscenity is that judge in Michigan who said that a 6-year-old boy who was half black could not be adopted by two white parents who wanted to make him their child because he was the child of the man's ex-wife, and that judge said he could not be adopted legally because, said the judge, who would he date when he grew up? That's obscene. And I know what I would do with judges like that and how I would behave towards judges like that. So we must make this kind of differentiation. What we confront here is a situation in which the country is caught in an extraordinary crisis. People are seeking to get out from the custodial relationships in which they have been caught. Students are seeking to do that. Black people are seeking to do that. Brown people are seeking to do that. All over the world. Those people over whom we have made ourselves the self-appointed custodians are saying, stick it. We want to do it ourselves. We want to decide how our lives are going to be run. And so the Peace and Freedom Party says to you, we are interested in elections because elections give us the opportunity to raise issues which no one else raises. Down in Venice, John Hagg is raising issues which no one else is raising. No one else talks as he talks. No one else raises the kind of things that John is doing. No one else is willing to do the kind of things that John is doing. Sitting here quietly, John is for the moment at peace. But when he goes back to Venice and carries out the activities that the Peace and Freedom Party believes in, he will run into what every peace and freedom candidate runs into all the time. All the time. The police will be bugging you. The police photographers will be taking your picture. We had a meeting in San Bernardino a couple of days ago. There were 4 police photographers, just for me. Little old me. 4 police photographers. 2 from the San Bernardino Police Department, 1 from some other police department, 1 unknown. I have been photographed so many times in the last 6 months by police photographers that you, the taxpayers of Los Angeles, have lost a fortune. Not only that, but when I offer the police photographers to buy a few prints, they won't even sell them to me. At least you could get some money back. Because I would be willing to buy some of those prints. We could use them in the campaign literature. Now that's not accidental. It's not accidental that the Peace and Freedom Party candidates are photographed, bugged, harassed, followed. It is because we are trying to say some things that no one else is saying. It is because we don't buy the jazz. It's because we're not going to be jived. And it's also because we are trying to create some institutions of political power that will be responsive to the people in the country. And that's what the election is all about so far as we're concerned. For us, November 6th is a far more important day than November 5th. Because on November 6th, we will begin the hard work of organizing communities, of attempting to create in communities the kind of institutions that can make the changes that are necessary if this country is going to survive. And so, when someone says to me, you only have 2% of the vote, I say, man, that's crazy. That means that in California, at this point, if you assume that 10 million people are going to vote in the election, that means that what? How much? I can't even figure 2%. That's 200,000 people. 200,000 people, that doesn't count students who are not old enough to vote, nor high school kids who are not old enough to vote, but who did. That means 200,000 people in California are aware enough of what is happening in this state and the country so that they don't accept that crap about the need to elect the lesser of two evils and are willing to participate in a tough, tough scene. I think that's extraordinary. That's the first sign of hope I've had in a hell of a long time. And I'm not therefore discouraged by the 2%. That's more than I expected us to have. Now, we've got no formula for success. No pie in the sky. I'm not going to promise you anything after this election. All we can promise you is that if you will join with us in the Peace and Freedom Party, we'll give this country one hell of a run for its money. We'll make one hell of an effort to continue in an American tradition which has been buried for too long. The tradition which doesn't say my country right or wrong. A tradition which says my country, when it's right, great, and when it's wrong, make it right. That's what the Peace and Freedom Party is all about. And it's not easy to do. We need your help. We need your help in Venice for John. We need your help all over for the senatorial campaign. We need your help for the Cleaver campaign. But just as important as that, we need your help afterwards. Because I'm convinced that if organizations like the Peace and Freedom Party and all the other groups throughout the rest of the country don't make it, this country won't survive. And I shouldn't like that to happen. Because this country could be one hell of a great, grooving, swinging place if we were only able to make it into the kind of country that it once started out to be. Thank you. Now, questions? You all hear the question? The question is, where do I stand on gun control question? Split. On the one hand, like everybody else, I'm against guns. I don't like guns. I had a belly full of guns all my life. So I don't like guns. On the other hand, it doesn't seem to me that gun control legislation really gets to the guts of the problem. It doesn't really solve the problem. I would be for gun control legislation. In fact, I'd be for the abolition of guns if we didn't have police carrying guns and shooting them. If we didn't have police carrying guns on off-duty hours. We have just had a black man murdered in San Francisco because some cop got mad at him because he supposedly scraped his bloody boat with the black man's car. So the black man murdered him. I'm sorry. The policeman murdered the black man. And that will continue. So at this point in time, I say that those people who need guns to defend themselves, and I think, it's sad to say, black people, Mexicans need guns to defend themselves, I would be opposed to it. Until we have established the kind of situation in this country where the police are under the control of the society a hell of a lot better than they are, If we live in a society in which only the police have the guns, we will be living in what really has to be known as a police state. Now, I know the argument, that the police give about this situation. Police say we've got to have guns because people throw rocks at us. And therefore, we have to be able to fire back. I have a ready solution to that. I don't want the police to blow a gut from aggravation when people throw rocks at them. My solution to that is to equip all the police cars with rocks. Let them throw rocks back. But seriously, and I mean that, facetiously, but also seriously. The problem of the gun control legislation is not one which can be separated from the context of the society in which we live. And as long as there are people in this country, as there are, who are being menaced by guns, and who will be menaced by guns of police or vigilante groups, then I'm against gun control. Until we get to the point where everybody is disarmed, and where a man doesn't have to worry when he's walking down the street because he's black, that he is going to suffer for this. Yes, sir.
If it were up to you to decide whether Cranston or Rafferty, which one of the two was elected, who would you choose and why?
I would be, I'm not in favor of either of them. No, I don't have to make that choice. If I have to make the choice, I'd say Rafston. Yeah, that's what it is. It's Rafston. It doesn't matter. I mean, I'm not going to accept that as the options that are open to me. If I had a choice between them, I say neither of them. Neither of them. I'm better than either of them. I don't have a PhD, but I didn't lie about it. So on. The fact of the matter is that getting into that scene is committing suicide. Every 4 years, people commit suicide. They go into the polling booth and they commit suicide by putting the thing down, by taking that kind of choice. We'll always be faced with those kind of suicidal choices until we build an institution like the Peace and Freedom Party.
What I'm getting at is the election of which one do you think would be better for the development of institutions like the Peace and Freedom Party?
It doesn't matter. I've got no more confidence in Cranston than I have in Rafferty to help me build the institutions. I think that when push becomes shove and I start building the institutions, Cranston will knock me on the head just as quickly as Rafferty will. The history is, I don't have to project that out. Let me give you a few examples of what I'm talking about. Take the VISTA program. Everybody said, Kennedy, Johnson were better than Goldwater and so on. Take the war on poverty. I'm an expert on that. I helped start it. I was one of the original architects of it. And I saw what a shock it became. Let us take the war on poverty and just one example of it, and you'll see what I mean. Here in California, there was a VISTA program. That's Cranston and Rafferty. There was a VISTA program in California. Nice liberal VISTA program, administered by liberals in Washington and liberals in the state. So these nice volunteers who wanted to do something, they went into the San Joaquin Valley. And when they got into San Joaquin Valley, they started doing what VISTA volunteers are supposed to do. Teach farm workers' wives how to diaper the babies, how to cook food. So everybody was happy. No one cared about that. The minute those VISTA volunteers moved out from that job on their own time to telling farm workers, listen, you want to get out of this goddamn miserable scene in which you're caught? Join the farm workers union. Strike the farmers. That was when the shit hit the fan. And it was the liberals who administered the program who broke that up. That was when they ran for cover, because that was when push became shove. And so the history of this country has been exactly that kind of history. Every time the pressure is on, the liberals collapse. And when we start to put the pressure on, we have no more expectation that the liberals, I even hate the word, there's no such thing as a liberal. The Democrats or the Republicans will respond in equal terms, and that's why I have no more confidence in Cranston than in Rafferty, or in Rafferty than in Cranston. I feel I'll get my lumps in either way, and if we win, It will be because we have strength, not because they're nice guys. Yes, sir.
The Peace and Freedom Party registered over 100,000 people to vote as Peace and Freedom Party members.
Right.
Yet, a very small percentage of that is taken active part of the Peace and Freedom Party. How do you expect to translate this 200,000 votes you're talking about into an activist 200,000?
You all hear the question? Okay. I don't know. I mean, I don't have, answers to everything. I think a couple of things happened so far as the peace and freedom, as that 100,000 is concerned. Well, one could look at it the other way and say, look, we doubled. We only had 100,000 when we started. We got 200,000 people who say that they're for peace and freedom now. So we doubled our strength. That's a big gain. But the other question about the activists, I think we lost some of our activists when the McCarthy thing took place. Now those people have gotten discouraged. They're turned off by politics. That's their response. They retreated into apathy. Now it's our task to try to bring them back into the Peace and Freedom Party. We have had a hell of a lot of internal problems in the Peace and Freedom Party. And we will continue to have internal problems in the Peace and Freedom Party. And I don't know what the answer to all those problems are. We'll just have to keep working at solving them. And the fact that we have our arguments and our disputes seems to me to be a sign of health. It takes a long time to work out a position. Peace and Freedom Party is only, a year old. We have been caught up in this election now for 6 months. What we need to do is to create programs and ideologies. And we're engaged in that effort now. And hopefully we'll be successful. Yes, sir.
Okay, well, if we take the race for governor in 1966, people in California were faced with the lesser of two evils, and they didn't accept the lesser of two evils by not voting for Brown, and Reagan was elected.
I'll repeat the question.
So, do you think that for an example, our university system would have went through the same destructive process as it is with Ronald Reagan as governor if Brown would have been elected?
Okay, did you all hear the question? The question was, in 1966, when we had the election for governor, we didn't choose the lesser of two evils. We didn't choose Brown, we chose Reagan. And do I think that the university would have gone through the same destructive process if we had chosen the lesser of two evils, Brown, as the university is going through now? Well, my recollection of the destructive process of the university and the destruction of the university was that it started in 1964 when Governor Brown tried to suppress the free speech movement. It wasn't Reagan. He would have done the same thing. It wasn't this man from the Department of Defense who thinks like a computer, Hitch. He wasn't the president of the University of California. It was Clark Kerr who started the university on that road so far as the students were concerned. Who was the enemy then? Against what was the free speech movement directed? What did 800 people get busted for? And a hell of a lot of them go to jail.
What about economically?
Economically speaking. What's revolt? Huh?
The incidental fees rose every year under Brown.
Yeah. Well, are you just talking about the university or generally? Well, as he points out, the university, the fees went up. Parking lot fees went up. Everything continued to rise. What happened to the university, its relationship with the CIA, its relationship with all the defense establishments, that was under a Democratic administration. I don't see that much change, except in style. Reagan comes on like what he is. You know, the minute the script is gone, you see what there is. But Pat had his script. Now, the fact of the matter is that if I was going to spend an evening with two people, if I had to make a choice between spending an evening drinking, I'd choose Pat Brown. He's a nice fellow. But he's no more equipped to deal with the problems than Reagan was. I took Pat Brown, I myself, took Pat Brown down to a meeting in the ghetto, which was an absolute catastrophe. And when it was over, and it broke up in the most god-awful shouting and screaming I ever heard, Pat Brown said to me, Paul, he said, I was not psychologically prepared to meet people like this. And I could only say to him, my God, Pat, you're the governor. How can you not be psychologically prepared to meet with people like, well, of course the answer is obvious. Neither is Reagan psychologically prepared, or prepared in terms of his willingness to do anything about it. But you can't make me see that there's that much difference. Who started the Bay of Pigs? Who went into the Dominican Republic? Who has still been blockading Cuba? That's not the Republicans. They'll do it. But it's the Democrats who are still blockading Cuba. We've all forgotten about that. It's as if they didn't exist anymore. It's as if, memory wipes out the past. Yes, sir.
What's your position on? I have two questions. What is your position on Czechoslovakia when the Russians came in? And secondly, we think of Eldridge Cleaver saying we love Mao Zedong, and asking the audience to repeat that. Do you dig on that?
Two questions. Did you hear him? First question is, what's my position on Czechoslovakia? And the second question is, what's my position on Eldridge Cleaver getting the audience to holler after him, we love Mao Zedong? The answer.
And Ho Chi Minh, too.
And Ho Chi Minh.
And Fidel Castro.
And Fidel Castro. Okay. First question. My position on Czechoslovakia is that I was opposed to the intervention of the Soviet Union in Czechoslovakia. I believe in socialism. I believe in freedom under socialism. I support in every way the efforts of the Czechs to get rid of the Soviet troops, and to get rid of the oppression that the Soviets will bring. Just as I support inside the Soviet Union the writers who are imprisoned, the people who now will go to jail. I identify with them as much as I identify in America with those people who are against their government. And I think that what we see in the case of the Soviet Union and the United States is a development where these two societies become closer and closer like each other. It's not accidental that the first person the Soviet ambassador went to inform of the impending invasion of Czechoslovakia was Lyndon B. Johnson. Because the last thing that these two countries want to do is they both are interested only in stability and order. Now as to the second question. You asked three, or the group was asked. Ho Chi Minh, Fidel, and Mao Zedong. I have different positions about each one of those. I have more feelings of support for Fidel than I do for Mao. Ho falls somewhere in between these two things. There are a lot of things in Ho Chi Minh's past that I find pretty rough to take. But what I see in Ho Chi Minh is a man who is leading his people with their support towards their notion of a free society. It may not be what I accept. I've got a lot of problems with some things that happen there. On Mao, it's hard to tell at any given point whether I'm for or against Mao, because it's hard to tell at any given point what Mao is for or against. The situation in China keeps changing so rapidly. But I think you ought to understand that when Cleaver leads that chant, what he is doing is blowing people's minds. And I think that's worth doing. I think that's worth saying. For too long, this country has refused to admit the existence of Mao Zedong. Refused to admit the intellectual existence of Mao Zedong, or deal with the notions and the political concepts provided by Mao Zedong. Now, I'll argue with Mao Zedong from my premise, the kind of socialist society I believe in, or the kind of communist society that I believe in. But I want to put it out there. I'm not spooked by Mao Zedong. And so, with Cleaver, I argue with him. Nothing wrong with disagreements. That's what it's all about, to have disagreements. What's wrong is to suppress disagreements or pretend that they don't exist. Let me come back. I'll come back to you. Let me see if I can get some more questions. Way in the back. Yes, sir. The question is, how do I evaluate a choice between McCarthy and Eldridge Cleaver? That is to say, I take it what you mean is, since they're both, you have to write in McCarthy. You don't have to write in Eldridge. You can. Oh, you mean apart from that? Oh, I never was a McCarthy fan. I would opt for Cleaver, because McCarthy, to me, was never any more. Well, I don't want to put him down. I mean, he laid it out. He laid it out on the line in terms of the war position. I don't think he made an enormous sacrifice for it. But I don't see anything in McCarthy that strikes to the heart of the problems. I listened to McCarthy very carefully. He's for NATO. He's for CETO. He's not opposed to the kind of activities. He says the war in Vietnam is an error and we're losing it, therefore we should get out. I dig Cleaver better because Cleaver says what I think, which is that the war in Vietnam is part and parcel of American policy. It's not an error. It's part of our foreign policy, not to be separated from the invasion of the Dominican Republic, nor the invasion of the Bay of Pigs, nor any other aspects of American foreign policy with which I disagree. And what I see wrong with McCarthy is that he won't talk about questions like that. And I think those are the decisive ones. So there, it's fairly easy for me. I opt for Cleaver. Yes, sir.
Your position on the Middle East problem?
Oy vey, I knew it. I knew it. You can never get through a meeting without my position on the Middle East problem. My position on the Middle East problem is that it's a bitch. That, again, there's no easy solution to it. Now, the long-term solution seems to me to rest somewhere in this kind of area. I think the Arab societies have to go about the business of making a revolution in their own countries. They have to give up the notion of annihilating Israel. They have to accept the existence of Israel as a reality. That's the first thing. And they have to say that clearly. So far as Israel is concerned, I think Israel has to give up the territories it occupied. I am for, I think, the internationalization of Jerusalem. I don't think that would be a tremendous problem for the Israelis. And if peace in the Middle East depended on whether or not Jerusalem was to be internationalized, I'd be for internationalizing Jerusalem. I think, too, the Israelis have to solve their internal problem in relationship to Arabs. Because I do believe that Arabs are second-class citizens in Israel, and that can't continue. Now, I would see, hopefully, since I've given up the notion of a binational state in Israel, I don't think that's realistic. I don't think it's possible to do any longer. I would see, hopefully, the creation of an independent Palestinian state along the West Bank, into which hopefully the refugees would be willing to live, in which the Israelis would be willing to pay, support that, because I do believe that what you had in that conflict is a conflict of two groups of people over the same land space, and that there is a real problem in equity and justice involved. And in one way I am hopeful about the future. I was in Israel during the Six-Day War, and I spent a good deal of time after the war was over talking to young Israelis, including lots of young Israeli soldiers. And they see the scene. They understand that they cannot go on living as they have been living. And they are not about to go out and annihilate the Arab states. So it's possible that when they begin to absorb positions of power, and if the Arab leadership changes, that we might see that kind of change taking place. I'll come back to you, but let me give everybody a question, huh? Yes, sir.
I'd like you to explain your views on socialism.
Wow. The question is, he'd like me to explain my views on socialism. Well, very briefly, I want to tell you that I believe a socialist society, the socialist economy, would be better than the kind we have today. I think it's possible that a socialist society could be a racist one, and I wouldn't want that. I think that a socialist society would be a better society, because it seems to me one of the worst aspects of American society is the kind of competitive economic order under which we're forced to live. I don't think that's natural to man. I don't buy the notion that the only way a man can get ahead is by having at his neighbors. We have seen too many examples of societies in which that's not true. And so essentially I'm for socialism because I believe socialism is a more human society than the one in which I'm forced to live now. Yes, sir.
Do you find fault with NATO because it protects capitalism or is there some other reason?
I find fault with NATO because NATO seems to me to be based on a premise that I don't accept, which is the premise of the Cold War. It seems to me that NATO serves no purpose whatsoever except to protect, on the surface, I don't think it's worth much more than the paper on which it's written, American investments and the American view of what Europe has to be like. I'm opposed to the Warsaw Pact at the same time. I'm opposed to those kinds of pacts in which the world is divided up by power blocks who say, this is our sphere, that's your sphere, you stay on your side and do whatever you please, and we'll stay on our side and we'll do whatever we please. And that's why I'm opposed to NATO. Yes, sir.
If you have any questions about filing your packet, don't waste your time standing in line. Go directly to the information table.
Well, there's two questions really in what you asked. I have a lot of doubts about demonstrations, but not because they're trying to force people into doing something. My doubts about demonstrations are that demonstrations seem to me to be a rather low level of participation. And that's what troubles me about the demonstration. The demonstration isn't followed up by very much. There isn't any organizing work that goes on after the demonstration. Demonstration for the sake of demonstration bugs me. We haven't yet found any new forms. But the other question that you ask is, which is put in that, do I support militancy in an attempt to get something? Yes, indeed. That's another question. I believe in militancy. And I believe in any kind of militant action that will produce the effect. I'm not concerned about the public reaction. When I was a union organizer during the 30s, and we ran a strike, and we ran a tough picket line, we never conned ourselves that the public liked what we were doing. I got used to being called an armed insurrectionist because I was in sit-down strikes. I got used to being attacked as a communist because we ran picket lines. And when we ran picket lines, the object was not to educate the public. The object was to stop production. And when we stopped production, people would say to us, you're losing public support. Yes, we lost public support. Boy, I tell you, you read the newspapers of the 30s and you can see how we didn't have any public support. But we built unions. We didn't convince the public we were right. We convinced the employers we were right by doing it the hard way. I don't know whether they were convinced or not, but they gave in anyway. Now, if the Los Angeles Board of Education is not convinced by argument and reason and the sweet voice of peace that Sal Castro ought to go back on his job as a teacher, then God damn it, let's sit in the place. Let's take it over until the Board of Education gives Sal Castro his job back. That kind of militance, I'm absolutely in favor of, and participate in myself. And if we lose the public support, I suppose maybe the Chicanos lost some public support by the sit-in. But God damn it, Sal Castro got his job back. And there are a hell of a lot of Chicano kids who are going to be better kids for it. And 10 years from now, no one will remember that we had a sit-in strike, just as no one remembers that those men who today sit at the table in the White House, the labor leaders, were once upon a time described as, communists and overthrow the society and all of that. Okay, I guess we're back to you.
I can understand you're referring to the social ills of America, what your vantage point always do, but I never heard too loud an outcry of the oppression done in the Soviet Union, in Eastern Europe. Why there are no elections in communist countries? Why don't we ever hear that from people? Never.
You're not reading the left-wing press carefully. First of all, so far as I'm concerned, I've always been making us think about that, things like that. But you really haven't been reading the left-wing press.
I never seen it.
Well, you got to read it. Read the press.
I've seen free press.
Well, no, I'm not talking about the free press. Well, read the National Guardian. If you want to know what the communists think, and I'm no great supporter of communists because they're far too conservative for my taste. But if you want to know what the communists think about Czechoslovakia, you ought to know that the Communist Party of the United States split on that question. And that the California Communist Party, which opposed the invasion of Czechoslovakia was cut off by it for its fund. And if you want to talk about that as an example, the Communist Party of France, Italy, England, a hell of a lot of other countries said they were opposed to it. Yugoslavia said it was opposed to it. You know, you can't, that's not true. On the question of the writers now, I just signed a large-scale petition about the writer. I noticed the rest of the names on it, a hell of a, it's all left-wing people. On the question of anti-Semitism in Poland, the Peace and Freedom Party went on record against it and against the suppression of the students in Poland. You got to read what we say. Now, don't expect the Los Angeles Times to carry a story saying that Paul Jacobs, Peace and Freedom Party senatorial candidate, announced his opposition to Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia. That you're not going to find. You have to read the Peace and Freedom Party press for that.
So I can assume that your position is that you're totally in favor of re-election of the Congress freedom of expression.
Yeah, I'm for freedom, and I'm for freedom of expression, and I don't support suppression of freedom, no matter who does it. No matter who does it. Yes, ma'am.
12 minutes or 8 minutes subject day.
The question is, don't I think it a suppression of freedom when militant black nationalists like Cleaver say, in relationship to the power structure, that if they don't do what we want them to do, we're going to stick them up against the wall and shoot them. I think the phrase is up against the wall, motherfucker. Precisely. I think that's the phrase. No, I don't think that, in that sense, that the suppression of freedom is to be judged on the same basis. Here is the problem. If you start out on the assumption, as I do, that in this country, which I believe to be a racist country, in all of its institutions, if you start out on that assumption, and you proceed from that to the fact that the black people are oppressed, and continuously oppressed, and that by and large white society has done nothing about this, then the next question is, how are the rights of black people going to be defended? How are they going to get them? I didn't notice, for example, in San Francisco, when that white cop off duty murdered the black man, I didn't notice any white people going down to City Hall and saying to the mayor, why isn't that man in jail? I didn't notice any demonstrations of white people against this. I didn't hear a single word of outcry about it. On the contrary, everybody said, well, you know, it's one of those things that happens. 4 witnesses to that event were arrested, kept in jail for 3 days, then released because there were no charges against them. I didn't see any outpouring of whites to defend those people. We are in the position that we are because white society failed to correct the injustices. Let her finish. No, because the fact of the matter is, you really have to search carefully before you find anything in that what Cleaver says or other people say, which he advocates annihilating whites. What they say is we will defend ourselves against whites who are trying to attack us. Now, that seems to me to be a legitimate position. Just as when I was a trade union representative, when someone tried to beat me in, I fought back. Now, it's a sad thing that in America, this seems to be how groups achieve dignity. Now, when the essence of that, of the position is, when Cleaver says, we are not going to play Jew. We are not going to be the Nazis' Jews to the whites of America. He is saying what the Israelis said. He also said, we're not going to play German Jew. We're going to fight to defend ourselves because every man has a right to survive. Now, I think it extraordinary, as a matter of fact, that in a society which is historically as marked as America has been, by the mass annihilation of minority groups, we wiped out the Indians, we wiped out Mexicans, we've been wiping out blacks for 400 years. I think it absolutely extraordinary that white people are continually worried that they're the ones, that the blacks... Have any white people been lynched? Have you ever heard of a white person being lynched by a black mob? Have you ever heard of a black off-duty policeman shooting a white guy? See, we got this fixed in our mind. And we got this fixed in our mind for, I think, very interesting reasons, which you don't really talk about very much. The sight of a black man with a gun strikes terror in the hearts of whites for reasons that are very curious. When we think of Indians with guns, that's kind of picturesque. A Mexican with a gun? Oh, well, you know, we all know Mexicans are lazy and they can't shoot straight. You know, you see it in all the movies, you know, bang, bang, bang in the air, Zapata, viva, bang, bang, bang in the air. But a black man with a gun, wow. Now, why is that? Why do we get so uptight about that? Well, I think there are a couple of reasons. One is, I think whites understand that they have really been practicing genocide on blacks for a long time, that there is this feeling of guilt about what we have done, and that the blacks have, in fact, a very legitimate grievance against whites, and you always are frightened of the person that you know you have wronged because you believe he has this. And the second thing is, I am convinced that there is also a sexual fear involved in this. I believe that somehow the sight of that black man with a gun asserting his manhood, asserting his dignity, strikes terror into the sexual anxieties of the rest of the society. And that this is a strong element involved in what is happening there. And so I don't get bugged by the notion of black men with guns. I don't feel any more bugged by the notion of black men with guns than I am by the notion of Israelis with guns. One of the things that was always curious to me was when people say to me, I was brought up in a tradition not like that of the German Jews. I was brought up in the tradition that, hell, if someone took you on, you took him back on. Now, we've got to sort out our heads about why we get so panicked when we hear or we read into what we hear something that is not actually there. And that's what I believe to be the thing in the case of Cleveland. Yes, sir.
You said that you have to write in McCarthy, but you don't have to write in Cleveland. I understood neither.
Well, they have the electors. If you vote for Peggy Terry, and you'll see that on the ballot. You'll see there'll be a thing for you to pull the thing down, and it says, no electors for president, electors for vice president, Peggy Terry. That's the one you put down. In the case of McCarthy, you'll have to write it in because there are no electors for McCarthy on the ballot. Yes, sir.
On guns, your position doesn't really sound realistic to me. It seems like as long as people have guns, there's not a chance in the world that the cops are going to get rid of things. But then there is a possibility that if people didn't have guns to defend themselves, that guns could someday get out of this.
The question is really which came first, the chicken or the egg. Now, first of all, there are a lot of countries in which policemen are not allowed to carry guns. There are a lot of countries in which policemen who do carry guns are only allowed to use them under the most limited circumstances, like in self-defense. And they are very accountable. I mean, self-defense really means self-defense in those situations. Now, in the United States, neither of those things are true. In the United States, a policeman with a gun, off-duty or on-duty, can fire it practically at will. All he has to say is, I thought the man was committing a crime and therefore I fired at him and perhaps killed him. Now, the only thing I can say about the gun situation is that at some point in the future, white society will sign a peace treaty with black people and with brown people. And then maybe like when you have a peace treaty, you give up your weapons. If we could convince the police that everybody, that the police come in, we all come together out on the plaza here at noon, and we all throw our guns in a big pile, I'll be there telling the Panthers, you put your guns down too, buddy. Until that happens, I refuse to allow myself to be caught in the scene where I advocate a policy which renders a whole group of people defenseless.
It's the exact thinking of the arms race.
I understand. But the difference is that in this case there is a reality that we're dealing with. We aren't being bombed by the North Vietnamese. We're not being bombed by the Russians. The Chinese haven't sent missiles over. But black people are getting killed every day.
There's a chance that the international situation would change if we disarm.
No.
Right?
No, everybody understands. I think everybody understands reasonably well that we are at a status quo so far as the arms are concerned. That there is nobody who can knock each other off. And that's why it's cool at the moment. That's why the United States didn't respond when the Soviets invaded Czechoslovakia, the way, for example, Britain had responded when the Nazis invaded Poland. There are too many risks. Now, when the point comes when the police begin to understand that when they kill, there will be a response, they'll stop it. I'll tell you one thing that's true. In Oakland, California, today, it is easier for a black man or a black woman to walk the streets unmolested than it was when I rode in the police cars with the Oakland Police Department and heard them say, after they had gotten to know me, at least enough know me, I was there long enough, so I heard them say to each other, as we drive around, and there'd be a black man walking on the street in a non-black area, I would hear a cop say to the guy driving, say to the other guy, there's one of those goddamn nigger studs. Let's stop and roust him down, shake him down. He doesn't belong in this side of town. That doesn't happen so often anymore. People are freer now in Oakland because people understand. The cops understand this kind of situation. Now that's a miserable, ugly world, and I don't like it. And I don't pretend to say that I advocate this as, my ideal for the world. But until the time when black people and Mexicans and Indians and all the other people who are getting the hell kicked out of them continuously, just because of what they are, until the police stop that, then I say I got to defend myself. When the police stop rioting, and the police are the rioters today, then I'll give up and say, brother, okay, I become a pacifist again. But not now. Not now. Thank you.
Thank you very much.